Hello, coaches. Welcome back to another episode of Coach Better Spotlight. Today, I'm chatting with Darnell Fine, instructional coach at Singapore American School in Singapore. Darnell is currently working on his doctorate in educational leadership from USC, grounded in racial justice scholarship. This Spotlight episode focuses on successful strategies coaches can use when working to bring an equity lens to our conversations with teachers, as well as pitfalls to avoid. In the full-length audio podcast, we discuss the relationship between education, coaching, and equity, how to identify if schools are really living their mission, and how to start these kinds of conversations on a school-wide level, including with parents. To hear the full episode, subscribe to Coach Better wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy today's episode, you will love all of the resources and professional learning experiences we're curating for you here at Eduro Learning. Check out our website to see all of our latest offerings at edurolearning.com. Welcome back to another episode of Coach Better. Today, I am super excited to be here with Darnell Fine. Darnell, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure. We have a lot to talk about today because we had a pre-conversation where we got super deep into all these topics. So I'm really excited to kind of dig deeper into that for all of you, our Coach Better listeners and viewers. So to get us started, Darnell, can you tell us a little bit about your personal education journey, your journey into coaching, and how coaching was actually part of that journey?
Yeah, I did my student teaching at a place called Feinstein High School, which kind of sounds a lot like my name, but it was an open space community with very constructivist teaching models and teaching practices. It was all interdisciplinary, multi-age classrooms. It was in Providence, Rhode Island, with my teaching practicum at Brown University. So I was placed there by the director of my program because he saw that my philosophy was really aligned with what they were doing at Feinstein High School. And because there was a fluid interdisciplinary model that was very constructivist, a lot of how the teachers worked together operated in a collaborative, participatory manner. So my student teaching experience, I was allowed to actually sit at the table with all of those folks. And I remember my last day, and I think this was not the first thing that sparked kind of my mindset around coaching, but the last day before I left, I sat with the teachers and I had a coaching session where I was actually coaching them on how to properly respond and respond with sensitivity to a trans student that they had in one of their classes, and just the misconceptions around that. And that's when I started to realize in a formal education setting, there can be opportunities to coach others beyond titles and beyond hierarchies and positions of power. I eventually, when I went into my first school in Atlanta, Georgia, Atlanta Neighborhood Charter, which is still near and dear to my heart, I went through two different programs, one through Georgia State University to become a teacher support specialist, in a very clinical supervision type of way, which wasn't super exciting, even though my professors were amazing. But there was also a parallel program we did with our new teacher residency program, where we were partnered up with Georgia State University as well as the School Reform Initiative, which has roots at Brown University. So it was a welcomed program to teach, to further hone my coaching skills. And that's where I learned different protocols and different strategies, techniques, but more so an ethos of having collaborative conversations with communities of practice and professional learning communities. So that's the genesis. There's been a wide journey, or a long journey, with continuing honing my coaching practices.
And tell us where you went after that. So we have your whole history, where have you taught and where are you now?
Yeah, in terms of the linear progression of like my resume. If you look at that, after that was Berkeley Carroll in Brooklyn, New York, which was fabulous and amazing. And I still did a lot of that work around supporting other teachers. Again, not in a formal coaching role. I was supposed to take over as their department chair for their first humanities department. And then London came calling. And I went to a school in London called the American School in London. And that's where I continued to do a lot of my coaching, but through a lens of equity as a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader, but also as a department chair in the English department, in a variety of other spheres of influence. I was still engaging with a lot of coaching practices. I think between Atlanta and London, I was doing a lot of consultancy work too. So a lot of my kind of structured coaching conversations happen with coaching individuals, but also coaching organizations around, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that was stateside as well as international. And now I'm here at the place that I love, Singapore American School, where my first couple of years I was a classroom teacher, but also the interdisciplinary team leader, where I still used a lot of those techniques around coaching, but I'm transitioning into a full-time instructional coach position. But it doesn't feel new. It feels like I'm coming home, even though I haven't actually been an instructional coach like formally. It still feels like it's where I'm supposed to be.
What are some, if people are also passionate about this same kind of thing and they want to work on their focus towards equity in the coaching that they do, what are some practical strategies that they can apply, and what are some pitfalls we can avoid that we can fall into without realizing it, that we should avoid, like we should look out for?
A lot of times people that you coach may view the protocols as patronizing, especially if you're if you're not aware of the power dynamics in the relationship with your coachees, whether it's position, if I'm coaching an administrator, or whether it's race, or a lot of times whether it's age. It can feel incredibly patronizing, but those protocols are about democratizing conversation. They can feel autocratic in the implementation of them, but they're about ensuring democratic and equitable voice. So I rely so much on protocols. I think protocols are incredibly important for setting the parameters of conversations in ways that benefit an equitable exchange and dialogue. I guess the other thing that I would say is sometimes we have to depersonalize things by bringing a third point. So bringing a third point to those conversations, something that can remove me and the coachee from the conversation. Let's look at the data, or let's look at the student work, and let's turn a critical lens or an observational lens on that third point. And those are the things that I rely on so much. But a lot of coaching for equity comes in the design of the protocol, and not just the design in terms of what do we want our coachees to learn, and that objective can actually come from them, not just in regards to knowledge and skills, but how do we want our coachees to feel when they're having a conversation with us? Sometimes it's relational. Sometimes it's using coaching as a healing practice, and not necessarily to meet the parameters of the institution or to check a box. Like, how do you want the people that you're talking with as human beings to feel? Do you need them to feel humanized? Do you need them to feel uplifted? Do you need them to feel disoriented? Do you need them to feel anxious? And all of those emotions are activating emotions that should be embraced. There's nothing wrong with anger. Sometimes getting the people that you're coaching to feel anger is needed if your end goal is social justice, if you need to instill a sense of urgency to fight for that justice. So a lot of it is emotions. A lot of it is the ethos. There are the protocols, there are the third points. All of this stuff is probably not new to anyone. But I think what falls under the umbrella of all of that is having an equity-minded ethos when you're approaching anything that you do. If your value, if your value of equity is driving everything that you do, it doesn't really matter the model that you use. A lot of the models try to minimize or disavow race, but if you're coming from an equity-based lens, any model can be an anti-racist model. I do not particularly like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think it's stolen from indigenous communities in the US. But I can use Maslow's hierarchy of needs at every single level and isolate conversations about racism. Okay, if it's about safety, being anti-racist is about the safety of our students of color. If it's about belonging, anti-racism is about instilling a sense of belonging or creating a sense of belonging for our Black, Indigenous people of color in our institution. So any model, even the problematic ones, you can gear it or leverage it if you're using an equity-minded lens.
And then this, I don't know if this is directly in the questions that we agreed on, but it's something we talked about last time, and I want to talk about it again today, which is even doing tech coaching, which is something that teachers can be resistant to begin with. There's always this question of like, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this conversation. And this is a huge, what you're talking about is huge and so important, far more important than the work that I normally do. How do you help teachers see the need for the time for these conversations? And I'm assuming many of them already do because you've talked about the culture of the school, but those that may not as much.
Yeah. Kim, honestly, I didn't look at your questions before because I wanted to have a fluid conversation. But the other reason I didn't really look at them in depth or prepare is because I've been doing this assistant director position for summer semester. And it's been 1,200 students with 150 teachers, and it's been a lot. And when you talk about time and those paradigm shifts that come with time, I think COVID-19 has taught us a lot about having a sense of urgency. In order to maintain the safety of our students during our summer semester program, these last 6 weeks or 5 weeks or however long we've been in session, we've had to exercise a sense of urgency and prioritize these safe distancing measures for the safety of our students. Like we have to find the time to actually do these things. And it's important because we need to maintain the well-being of our students, but also each other, so that we're not getting sick, so that we can remain open as an institution. So when I think about equity through that particular lens, what if we treated racism and oppression and sexism and classism the same way we treat COVID-19 as a pandemic that is harming the safety of our students? And when you look at it through that particular lens, we have to have a sense of urgency and make time to engage with these issues of equity because the safety of our students depend on it. COVID-19 may have physical effects, but so does racism. But when we look at those different isms and those different inequities, they scar you mentally, physically, emotionally, in a variety of ways. So we have to have that same sense of urgency to ensure that we're protecting the students we work with and the community members that are most marginalized and other.
It's so clear when I hear you talk, like, yes, that is just so clear. And I think sometimes it needs to be framed in that, I don't want to call it black or white, but I think urgent is the right word. Like, no, this is not something we can wait around for. And I had a great conversation this morning with Dawson Jabber, who's one of our women who lead, and she was actually saying the same thing about technology being a tool for equity and how teachers cannot wait to use those tools in their classroom because they provide access, they provide accessibility, they provide all these elements that give students a level of equity that they didn't have before. And hearing her talk about it that way, I was like, oh, that clicks another switch in my mind, because I think maybe I have a lot of like gray thoughts floating around, and then hearing it explained and so crystal clear, like, okay, got it. Thanks for watching today's episode. Don't forget to check out edurolearning.com for more great learning opportunities and connect with us on social media at Eduro Learning to stay up to date with everything we share.